Hello, this is Georgina Rose, part-time esoteric content creator and part-time center of pestilence. And by the end of this video, I will be even more of a center of pestilence than I am already, because in this video, we're going to be talking about the Kybalion by the three initiates. Now, the Kybalion, I think, is one of these esoteric books that pretty much everyone is exposed to. I mean, you can walk into a Barnes & Noble and get a copy of the Kybalion, like, even in very non-esoteric parts of the country. They are everywhere, and many people have, well, let's just say, opinions on the Kybalion. I would say within the broader esoteric sphere, the Kybalion is actually really controversial. Of course, if you are new to the esoteric, you may be confused. Wait, why do people not like the Kybalion? Because when you're new to this stuff and you pick up the Kybalion makes a lot of sense and is something you tend to like. As well, the Kybalion got a little bit more exposure recently because it was discussed on the Joe Rogan podcast. Now, Joe Rogan is not going to watch this video, I would assume. I don't think he knows I exist. I really doubt that. But if you are watching this, I'll come on your podcast and talk about the esoteric. I'm willing to do it. But anyways, it's a book everyone's aware of. And the thing is about it is I think that there's a bit of a middle ground. I'm probably going to name this video something really kind of incendiary because I am a servant to the demiurge that is the YouTube algorithm, but I kind of feel complicated about it. I think that the Kybalion is not the be-all end-all, and whenever I see it touted as the be-all end-all, I kind of want to just like throw the Kybalion into the trash. But at the same time, a lot of the content in the Kybalion I actually agree with. So what is the point of contention? Why do people really hate the Kybalion? And that would be that the Kybalion touts itself as hermetic philosophy. Now, hermeticism is a broad category of esoteric philosophy that is related to Egypt and a figure, Hermes Trismegistus. Now, Hermes Trismegistus was not a real person. He is a syncretism of Mercury, Hermes, Thoth, all these gods of knowledge, communication, and wisdom. And he is sort of a spiritual figure that, you know, is very tied to Hermeticism. Hermeticism, though we must note, is not one ideology. Of course, most people who are self-proclaimed Hermeticists are what we would call classical Hermeticist. And that, I would say, is a coherent school of thought with a body of work related to it. But in 2022, or 2023, or 2024, whenever you're watching this, Hermeticism is more than just classical Hermeticism. There is the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which I like to call Neo-Hermeticism, that is Hermetic in a sense, but it has deviated and incorporated more elements that were not previously in this classical Hermeticism. And the Hermeticism of the Kybalion is sort of something else entirely, because this is the thing. We look at the Kybalion, we need to look about who wrote it. So the Kybalion is credited to the three initiates, a vague, anonymous author, essentially. Now, obviously we don't know who these people are. They claim to be these initiates. Cool, whatever. Who are they really? So, the Kybalion is published by the Yogi Publication Society. That is who owns the copyright. Who is the Yogi Publication Society? So the Yogi Publication Society is connected to the Theosophical Society. Now, Theosophy is a very complicated esoteric philosophy that emerged out of this woman, Helena Blavatsky, who is the Slavic woman who really delved into mysticism, esotericism, and developed a whole school of ideas around her. And out of Theosophy, following Blavatsky, there were people like Steiner, Alice Bailey, a lot of people came out of that. And Theosophy sort of expanded into this really broad thing. And now there's a bunch of osophies. And one thing that also came out of it is the New Thought movement. The New Thought movement and the New Age are not the same, but the New Age did definitely pull from the New Thought movement. The Kybalion is solidly in the New Thought movement. That is where it originates. I think the Kybalion should be explained as a product of New Thought or even Theosophy. I don't think it is classically Hermetic, and I think the problem with it is a lot of people read the Kybalion and think they understand classical Hermetic philosophy, because also since it's by the three initiates, it kind of has this aura of it being a lot older than it is. It's not old, it's pretty recent, like it's not this ancient text. It's not within the past few decades, but it is a relatively recent text. So that's the controversy. Now let's talk about what's actually in the Kybalion, because I want to go through the contents and discuss what they are, my thoughts on them, what they mean, and everything related to that. So the thing that comes out of the Kybalion are these hermetic principles, which are basically key points in esoteric philosophy. I don't have an issue with most of these points. I actually agree with most of them. So let's go through them and I'll explain what exactly they mean. The first point is the principle of mentalism. All is the mind is all. So basically what this means is the mind is esoteric and the mind is a dimension of the esoteric world. This is a point that is in most Western esoteric philosophic systems, right? The Kybalion is very rooted in Western esotericism, deeply rooted in that. And this sort of mind-spirit connection is so important. If you believe in any sort of mysticism, you believe that our mind has power and our thoughts have power. Even prayer, if you just pray silently to your God of choice, you are using your thoughts to make something happen. You are enacting your thoughts. You are putting forth a bit of will, if you want to get into kind of the thelemic view of things, right? It's about that will. And so our mind is powerful and our mind is more than what's in our head. This, I think, almost gets into this debate about the psychological and the spirit model, which if you're not familiar with this theological debate, it's whether mysticism is all psychological in our heads, archetypical, or if it is all external spirits that exist. And what's interesting about this principle of mentalism, it kind of bridges these two in a way that I think can clarify a lot, where our head is big, but there are things bigger than our head, but they are linked. That might be a little confusing, but that's essentially what this is saying, right? Our mind is powerful, and recognizing that is the first step towards any sort of spiritual growth. Now, the second hermetic principle is the principle of correspondence. This is as above, so below. And this is how I like to explain it as the microcosm and the macrocosm. So we are the microcosm. You are a microcosm. And the cosmos are a macrocosm. The way that I like to explain this, because I think it's the one that people get the quickest, is astrology. If you've heard my explanation for this, I'm so sorry. I'm going to do it again. So astrology posits that the movements of the planets have an impact on our daily lives. The argument for this is that this is a direct link, right? So these movements impact our lives because there is a co-relationship between the two. That logically posits that if you can manipulate your small space, the larger space can be manipulated because this is a back and forth relationship. It's this connection on either side. What we do in our small microcosm impacts the macrocosm and vice versa. If you believe in any sort of magical practice, this is something you inherently are going to believe in. As well, if you believe in things like synchronicity, it's like maybe seeing repeating numbers that are significant means something, that is an as above, so below belief. It exists in every Western tradition to some extent, and I mean, I completely agree. So far, I'm not disagreeing with the Kabbalion at all. Next hermetic principle is the principle of vibration. Basically, that nothing is still and everything vibrates. So interestingly, science has actually proven this to be true, but on a metaphysical level, what this is arguing for is that there is a vibrational, energetic field of sorts around us that is constantly vibrating, right? It's not just literally that, all molecules vibrate, though that's true as well. Thank you, science, for proving the esoteric with that one. Basically, everything is vibrating. There are energies everywhere. There are subtle bodies, all that. I do agree with this. I believe there's a metaphysical dimension for everything. The term energy and explaining it as energetic fields is not really how I like to explain these things. I think I like the term body of light instead of energetic body, just because it relates more to the traditions that I've spent time in. And I don't know, it's not exactly how I tend to frame it, but I do agree with it. I like framing things as there is a spark of divinity in everything. There is mysticism in everything. There is God in everything. There is no part of us that is not of the gods, right? I am very much in that camp. So I do agree with this, but it's not how I tend to explain things. This is a point you see a lot in New Thought, this idea of like energies and vibrating, and this is something that really did enter the New Age. If you're from like a neo-spiritual background, you're gonna know this stuff. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with this. I think this way of explaining things doesn't really have roots in classical hermeticism in the same way that some of these other points do. Though I would say, I mean, most classical hermeticists I know would still agree with this. Yeah, it's just, this point's true. It's just, this is where it gets a little more, I would say, New Thought-y than straight hermetic. But once again, that's not inherently a problem, right? There's nothing wrong with New Thought. It's just, it's not the hermeticism that people think it is, which, I mean, let's be real, there are a lot of occult texts and esoteric texts that are like that. I mean, the fact that we cite people like Hermes Trismegistus or King Solomon or Agrippa all the time. I mean, like, obviously these people did not write everything attributed to them. Like, duh, but they are attributed anyways. And so I guess in a sense, the Kybalion kind of initiates people into this thing that happens in esotericism where books and whatnot are attributed to people who didn't necessarily write them. So maybe it is kind of a good entryway in that sense. The next hermetic principle is that everything is polarity. It's called the principle of polarity. And basically what it is that everything exists on opposite poles. Good, evil, masculine, feminine, active, receptive, severity, mercy. They're all on poles of each other. Now, this idea is one that I would say is deeply Western. This idea does not necessarily translate over to Eastern ideas, which is why I do like distinguishing Kybalion as New Thought instead of Theosophy, because Theosophy really does mix this East-West stuff all over the place, which I don't think the Kybalion does. Anyways, this idea, it's all over Western esotericism, right? This idea that there are these two poles that everything exists between, and that through the collision of force and form, the universe emerges and is created. So, yeah, I would agree with this. The next principle is the principle of rhythm. It is basically that everything has rhythm. Everything ebbs, flows, rises, and falls. I mean, yeah, I would agree with this. It's not how I like explaining things. This is the thing that I'm catching with the Kybalion, repeatedly actually, is that I do agree with what it's saying, but I don't think it's actually the best way of explaining it. I think maybe what the Kybalion was trying to do is explain these principles in ways that people unfamiliar with mysticism will instantly understand. Because, right, if you're new to this stuff, you're not going to know these, like, buzzwordy terms that we use, but if you hear the word, like, rhythm or vibration, I mean, that's going to make sense. It's kind of like why I think the reason why New Agers like words like downloads and whatnot is because it's language we get, rather than using more esoteric lingo that can be really jarring to people who are new. Because this is the thing, I kind of agree with all of this. I don't think any of it is wrong. It's just, I don't think it's the most accurate, like, it's just phrasing. Like, this is the thing that I'm getting annoyed with. It's just like I'm, like, nitpicking it. Like, there are things that just, I don't think are the best way to explain it. And I think what happens is people read the Kybalion and they take these principles and think of them as, like, fundamental laws, which, I mean, they kind of are. I mean, all this stuff is metaphysically true, right? But they think this phrasing is, like, the way to do it, and they get this really, like, dogmatic, strict worldview from the Kybalion, and they're like, oh, well, that's this principle, when I think what this is actually meant to be is just sort of principles to outline metaphysics, rather than this, like, 10 commandments type thing that I think some real people who are really, really into the Kabbalion tend to get from it. The next principle is the one that I actually have the most disagreement with, and that would be the principle of cause and effect. Everything has a cause, everything has an effect. All right, so what is that metaphysically arguing? What does that mean? Because what I think of when I read this is determinism. Determinism is a theological position that everything is determined, that fate exists, there is no free will. But the thing is, this cause and effect thing could posit that free will is everything, right? This could be taken in two very radical directions. One, radical determinism, because if you look at actually physics, the term determinism is used as like a physics term for cause and effect, but on a theological level, it is the case against free will, which is what I believe. I believe that free will does not exist. My quick explanation for that is, if you believe in the idea of true will, which I do believe in the idea of true will, the idea that divinity has set a will for you that you must discover, and then when you tap into that will, you sort of get infused with power, everything falls into place, implies that there is no free will, because if there's free will, then how can there be a true will that you have to discover? These two ideas are not compatible. They don't make sense together. They have to cancel each other out. You either have a true will or there's free will. They're radically different. But at the same time, like if it's just cause meets effect, I mean, that could mean anything, right? I mean, obviously causing things make things happen, but does that mean we have the agency of the cause, or the cause and effect relationship exists in a determinist framework? I don't really know. The Kabbalion's not very clear on this. So this principle, I mean, like, okay, maybe, it needs another word for it. I don't like this phrasing. I think that it doesn't make sense, it's vague, and it could mean really anything. I mean, you could take this in many theological directions. Now, the final principle in the Kabbalion is the principle of gender. Everything exists on a masculine and feminine polarity. So obviously this is kind of a continuation of the law of polarity, right? This force and form come together to form the universe, but it takes it in a divine feminine, divine masculine way. I've talked extensively about the divine feminine and the divine masculine. I believe it is real. I believe metaphysical gender exists. I'm a big believer in this, and this principle I 100% agree with. The divine masculine and the divine feminine exist in almost every single religion and in almost every single culture in some form or another. This prevalence, I think it must exist, and I have found in my personal experiences that it absolutely does exist. So those are principles. I would say I mostly agree with them. They're just certain things that I don't like how it's phrased. And you know, one thing that got me thinking when I was reading through these is how this really does contrast against the Corpus Hermeticum, the classic Hermetic text that gets cited the most when we talk about Hermeticism and is sort of the, I guess, basis of Hermeticism. It's the one that people come back to. And that is that the Kybalion is very stripped down and simple. It's essentially a list. Like at the end of the day, Kyballion's a list. Whereas the Corpus Hermeticum is really theological and philosophical, and the tone is very different, and it is a bit more complex. This is the thing about the Kybalion. It's simple. I think the Kybalion, when we talk about who should read it, I would say if you're not a beginner, I wouldn't waste your time. I think the Kybalion makes sense if you're a beginner, but if you're a beginner who has this knowledge that, hey, the Kabbalion is not everything, the Kybalion is not classical Hermeticism, because I think it does outline some basic ideas in Western esotericism that people do need to learn. And the thing about the Kybalion is it's easy to read, it's quick to read, it's digestible. The Corpus Hermeticum, which is obviously, I would say, the better text, the more complex text, the one that I find myself coming back to. For me, like, I read the Kybalion when I was new, and I haven't ever had an urge to really pick it up again until when I wanted to make this video. Like, it's just not something I, desire to come back to. Whereas the Corpus, I do go back to, right? It's complicated. But once again, it's not beginner-friendly. And so I think the Kybalion has a place. I'm glad it exists. It can be a good, like, gateway drug, essentially. But it's just that. It's a gateway drug. It is not the complex metaphysics that is Hermeticism. It's just simple, and that's okay. Simple texts are okay, but in a sense, it is not what people think it is. And I do think that the people who run around talking about how the Kybalion has ruined occultism and the Kybalion is trash, I'm kind of debating naming my video The Kybalion is Trash, just to get those people in and have them hear a nuanced opinion. They kind of have a point. This is the thing. They have a point, but they take it too far, right? Like, the Kybalion is not amazing. It's not the worst book ever either. There are many books that I have picked up in the occult sections of bookstores that I have a much bigger problem with than the Kybalion. There are some that make me want to pull my hair out. The Kybalion does not make me want to pull my hair out. I just wish people knew what it actually was. That's literally it with my beef with the Kybalion. I also don't like the way they explain things, but, there are a lot of books I don't like the way they explain things. So, my verdict on the Kybalion. It's complicated. Not really hermetic. Kind of hermetic in some senses. Some of the ideas are hermetic. I would say it is Hermeticism inspired. There we go. I fixed it. But yeah, that's all I really want to say. If you want to support me, I'm Georgina Rose. I have the .darling Patreon, and that's where you can actually support me. I post an extra video every month. You get early access to all of my videos. You get ritual guides every month, which are like 20 pages of original rituals you can do so you can get your practice started immediately. You get access to my private Telegram group where we talk about all sorts of topics. It's really fun, and if you're a high enough tier, you can meet with me once a month for spiritual mentoring or consultations. As well, I am on every platform under the sun. I am on here, obviously on YouTube. I'm on TikTok, Telegram, Instagram, Twitter. I host the podcast, The Postmodern Iconoclast, which is a commentary on culture. It's also on this YouTube channel, so you don't even need to leave the channel to listen to it, but it also is on Spotify, Google Podcast, Audible, Anchor, Patreon, everywhere. It's literally everywhere, except Apple Podcast. I have beef with Apple Podcast, so not there, but everywhere else. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Like, comment, subscribe, and if you subscribe and ring the bell for 93 days, you'll meet your Holy Guardian Angel, and you'll never need to read the Kybalion again. All right, see you in the next one. Have a great day, morning, mid-morning, afternoon, whatever time it is, wherever you are. All right, bye.